Every year around this time, loads of videos and social media posts appear about St. Patrick. They are often full of assertions such as the real name of St. Patrick is Maewyn Succat. Spoiler, it is not. Or that the equally false myth about St. Patrick and the snakes really represents a massacre, a genocide of druids and pagans. It does not. Often these videos are made with lots of AI photos, which are totally historically wrong and anachronistic. In addition, they tend to use bland, plastic paddy Irish music and draw on a mishmash of historical eras. Few of them are made by people with a knowledge of the Irish language. This can be seen in badly pronounced Irish. How hard can it be to pronounce Samhain? Or the use of English version of words, Beltane, not Bealtaine. Almost always these videos convey a very simplistic picture, portraying an Ireland that seems to be Tolkien's Shire and which never existed. Moreover, many also make St. Patrick into some kind of monster responsible for a massacre or genocide of pagans and druids, a pagan apocalypse. In addition to the absence of the Irish language, they are based on a facile knowledge of the often contested history of Ireland. This video is my response to these historical inaccuracies, aiming to correct the picture a bit, although I am somewhat skeptical about having any sort of impact. To say the least, these videos annoy me. History is something that is constantly rewritten and revised. However, this has to be based on evidence, sources, and solid arguments. The interpretation of sources is also a vital skill, one that can take a long time to develop and is too often absent in popular history. As might be guessed, the vast majority of these videos are based on English language secondary sources. Many of these are not reliable, as they are based on outdated translations, lack analysis and profundity, and tend towards simplistic portrayals of Irish history and Irish culture. Unfortunately, videos from a neo-pagan perspective are often very guilty of this, choosing to build upon an imaginary past and inventing a massacre that did not happen, not caring that Irish people could find this offensive. As a result, they can come across as colonialist, with misguided pontificating about Irish history, often by American pagans but not limited to them, without knowing much about Irish history at all. To be fair, it's not only neo-pagans that do this. It is something that happens a lot with the Irish famine, which is mindlessly labelled as a genocide by many, again without an understanding of the social and political structures of 1840s Ireland. Complicated and painful history is reduced to erroneous simplifications. And indeed, I also have many memories of arguing in the 1980s and 1990s with a certain type of British ultra-leftists about Irish history in Northern Ireland, and being told I was wrong for not supporting the IRA. Indeed, the internet these days seems to have been very good at amplifying extremist views and drowning out a multitude of perspectives. Neopaganism covers a large array of different religions, religious perspectives, beliefs, and practices. It tends to draw on aspects of various different cultures or historical traditions. In other words, it is syncretic, which is perhaps what people find attractive in it. However, this syncretism contains the danger of developing a colonialist mentality, or cultural appropriation. In other words, borrowing and distorting aspects from a particular historical culture, misusing or misinterpreting these aspects and thus forming an ahistorical picture, or worse, and doing this without a profound understanding of the history or culture of Ireland, despite the often overwhelming historical evidence that the picture they paint is wrong, and perhaps even harmful. This is definitely present in the types of videos discussed above. Involved in this is the cultural appropriation of aspects of Gaelic mythology, taking a bit of the Morrigan, a bit of Lugh, taking St. Brigit and making her a goddess, all without a knowledge of Irish, let alone Old Irish, or the ability to critically analyze the sources. This results in the creation of a false history and a false atrocity, which is then evangelized, or more crudely, pushed down people's throats. Unfortunately, no matter how often historians or Irish people point out the problems with this view and show that there was no pagan apocalypse, this viewpoint seems to become stronger. As an aside here, I would recommend listening to the lectures of Ronald Hutton on the history of paganism. He has a fascinating series on YouTube ranging from paganism in the Bronze and Iron Age to the present. This is a most enlightening and interesting series, especially on how many pagan beliefs have origins in the Christian period, or the emergence of modern Neopaganism. He is a definite antidote to the videos preaching a pagan apocalypse. I would like to stress that I have nothing against Neopaganism. As a bad Catholic with a passion for history, I am sympathetic to the idea of reviving the beliefs of the past. Yet, this cannot come at the cost of history. Although modern neo-paganism is a bit like pre-Christian Ireland in that there is no single church, but rather a multitude of practitioners and beliefs, there is a need to address these issues. And, if I may be crude, there is a need for neo-paganism to get its house in order, to correct the history, to try to reduce the dissemination of a colonialist mindset and completely false history, which can be harmful. Also necessary is an awareness of the problem of the appropriation of Gaelic culture and beliefs, and the need to treat the past with respect, and not to invent an idyllic but false past for any people. The question of language also arises here. With some exceptions in Ireland, most neo-pagans who venerate Gaelic deities do so in English. Worshipping the Gaelic gods in the language of the conqueror is slightly problematic, is it not? Equally problematic, many claim to be recreating a Celtic paganism, another can of worms. The need for a correct history and to be careful with colonialist ideas is particularly clear in the idea of a pagan Holocaust. In short, this absurd story insists that the myth of St. Patrick banishing the snakes is a metaphor for his massacre of druids and or pagans. According to this perspective, snakes represent druids. Therefore, his expulsion of snakes is really a not-so-secret metaphor for the violent and bloody destruction of druids and pagans by Patricks. This is because, as everybody knows, druids had snake tattoos on their arms. Of course, this leads to the question, why would druids have snake tattoos? And how does anyone know that they used them? As might be guessed, this myth is completely wrong. I'll return to its origin in a while. Drawing on the ideas of Eric Hobsbawm and Terence Ranger, it is actually an invented tradition. Even the myth it is based on first appears many centuries after St. Patrick. Let us look at this in more detail. Much of the basis of neo-paganism is either Victorian or 20th century in origin, as Ronald Hutton has clearly shown. The same goes for many ideas that seem pagan and ancient nowadays. For example, the idea that at Halloween the veil between worlds was weakened is neither Gaelic or Celtic. It is Victorian, but it has seeped into common knowledge as Celtic and the basis of Halloween or Samhain. Another example, the pagan goddess Brigit is a late 19th century or early 20th century invention. In fact, Maud Gonne was one of the first to advocate this. It is important here to understand the intellectual currents in the background, especially Romanticism and nationalism. Both of these have had a profound impact on modern Europe. Romanticism developed in Europe in the late 18th century. Apart from the Germanic writers, one of the main expressions was Macpherson, notably his work Ossian. Cultural appropriation raises its head here, as Macpherson borrows the Gaelic literature of the Fianna and removes it from Ireland. Like the modern equivalents, his knowledge of Irish, in either its Scottish or Irish version, was limited. Oisin became Oisin. In fact, I don't know how to pronounce it. This book became a bestseller all over Europe. Despite its dodgy basis, Romanticism led to the emergence of modern nationalism, i.e., a nationalism based on national myths and states. One positive result of this in Ireland is that it led to a rediscovery of the Gaelic world. Nonetheless, this resulted in many misconceptions about Gaelic society, such as that Ireland was based on clans, that it was primitive, that the leader of a sept was called the O'Neill, the O'Donnell, the O'Brien, that the leaders of septs were elected, etc. It also produced various ahistorical mythical figures such as Brian Boru, Red Hugh O'Donnell, and Granuaile the Pirate Queen. All of these are historical figures, but the mythical figures built in the 19th and 20th century have come to far outweigh the real versions. Neopaganism emerged in a similar way. It was a product of Romanticism and the concern with the esoteric that also resulted from this. As Ronald Hutton has shown, one of the main aspects of this was the idea of a great goddess, namely a belief that there had existed a single prehistoric European religion centered on the worship of a powerful female deity. This was dominant in many fields in the first half of the 20th century. Various figures influenced its emergence. One of particular relevance to Ireland was Robert Graves. He is the author of several great books, including the wonderful I Claudius and his less important novel on the late Roman general Belisarius. His book, The White Goddess, has been particularly influential in this regard. He is the inventor of a particular version of the myth of the Ogham alphabet, one that is false but which continues to have a huge influence. In the second half of the 20th century, the idea of the great goddess faded as evidence against it grew. Nevertheless, Neopaganism expanded, with the Wicca version becoming particularly important. This draws on Saxon, Irish, Scottish, Welsh, and other cultures. In recent decades, Neopaganism has expanded dramatically, and in addition to the original Wicca, there are Norse, Gaelic, and other reconstructionists. However, too often these reconstructions are based on romanticized versions rather than actual historical practices. This is the case of the snake tattoos supposedly worn by druids. It may surprise you to discover that there is no historical evidence for this at all. Rather, it appears to date all the way back to 1983 and to Marion Zimmer Bradley's book, The Myths of Avalon. It can be surprising what can originate deeply held beliefs. To undermine the apocalypse story even more, the story of St. Patrick banishing the snakes comes many centuries after his death. Indeed, it seems to originate with Geraldus Cambrensis, the propagandist of the Norman invasion of Ireland. His books aim to paint a picture of the Irish as being savage, uncivilized, not really Christian, and thus deserving of all the violence and killing inflicted on them. His propaganda was so virulent that the Elizabethans reused it 400 years or so later. So, in a way, the myth of St. Patrick and the snakes is related to massacres. However, the Neopagans who believe in this massacre are looking in the wrong direction. It was carried out not by St. Patrick, but by Normans and Elizabethans. Returning to history, to beautiful, complex, messed up, contradictory history, we need to accept it as it is instead of creating myths of golden ages in the past. It is far more interesting this way. We also need to accept that there is so much we do not know and will never know. This is especially relevant to forms of belief in Ireland before Patrick. We know very little about religious practices in Ireland in the 2nd or 3rd century AD. Although Patrick mentions some customs, according to some scholars, these are not actual accounts of Irish behaviour, but rather are related to biblical tropes. In relation to this, I recommend reading the Vox Copernicum blog, especially the articles on St. Patrick. This is accessible and essential reading for anyone wanting to understand this period. Unlike the pick and mix view of pagan Ireland, it should be understood when people say pagan Ireland, they are not referring to a single historical period. Rather, this refers to the thousands of years covering many different historical cultures in Ireland in the very long period before Christianization. We have to differentiate between these different cultures, between Neolithic passage grave culture, bell beaker culture, Gaelic or Iron Age culture, and others. All of these had different forms of belief. Many romantic pick and mix videos show standing stones with elaborate carvings full of spirals, mixing at least two completely separate cultures. Iron Age standing stones rarely have carvings. Rather, the spirals shown are found on many of the passage graves, predating the Iron Age by over 1,000 years. To complicate things further, rock art should be mentioned here. This was probably made in the Neolithic and Bronze Age, but it figures little in this type of video or history, as it does not fit into simplistic pictures. However, this type of complication is essential to history. History is complicated, complex, and contradictory. Simplifications result in bad history full of inaccuracies and misrepresentations. In making a video or writing about any aspect of history, this has to be shown. It also has to be admitted what we don't know. Unfortunately, too often people present history, whether in videos or books, without acknowledging this, without acknowledging what they do not know. This is especially true in relation to the Iron Age in Ireland. It is as if people are afraid of admitting that they do not know something, as if all mysteries have to be solved. As a result, too often supposition and conjecture are presented as fact. Contrary to the idyllic society with decorated standing stones and druids in long flowing robes, the Iron Age was a rather obscure period for Ireland. We know a lot about the Bronze Age, thanks to the various stone circles and stone rows, many of which have complex astronomical alignments. We also know that Ireland was part of a wide trade network, with copper mined in Kerry turning up in England. However, we know less about the Iron Age. Here, the population appears to have declined, judging by the expansion in forest and the decline in grass. Some sort of environmental disaster may have occurred at the end of the Bronze Age, leading to social decline. Moreover, thanks to the lack of material culture or monuments, we know less about it than the previous periods. The written sources that many claim are related to it are all written after Ireland became Christian, and after the assimilation of the mentality of Rome, in which barbarian, druid, Gaul, etc. all had specific meanings. All these sources are also written by people with a far more detailed and indeed lived knowledge of the Bible than at present. For Christians at this period, the Bible was something real. It was the basic text and the ultimate source of knowledge. People's lives were profoundly intertwined with it. However, looking at early medieval Irish sources, say Laura Gabala, and using them uncritically without a profound knowledge of the period they were written in, and a knowledge of the Bible, can easily result in misinterpretations and even the labeling of things that are rooted in the Bible as pagan. Contrary to the Iron Age, the Christian period was a time of population expansion and possible economic boom. Evidence of this can be seen in the number of ring forts around the country. There are at least 40,000 of these. Many more have been destroyed over the centuries. Contrary to how they are often seen, these were homesteads, not forts. Their sheer number points to an expanding population in the first centuries following Christianization. Also relevant is the vast number of monastic sites. Many in Irish society at this stage felt the need, the vocation, to turn to the monastic life, often going to liminal areas on the fringes of Irish society, as can be seen in the monastic sites along the coast of Kerry. It's also important to note that although Ireland was never part of the Roman Empire, it was not isolated from it. It was very much in touch with it through trade, the exchange of ideas, including religion, technology, and more violent exchanges such as raiding. Speaking of raiding, this is how St. Patrick came to Ireland. As we draw towards the end of this video, it is worth mentioning another new urban legend about St. Patrick. Widely stated on the internet, and occasionally in other forms of media around this time of year, is that the real name of St. Patrick is Maewyn Succat. Rather than being some sort of mystical or secret knowledge, this, once again, is 20th century in origin. Indeed, this urban legend should not exist, as St. Patrick himself says his name was, wait for it, Patrick. The myth of Maewyn Succat indirectly results from the writings of Tyrconnell around the end of the 7th century, more than 200 or so years after St. Patrick had died. Tyrconnell stated, quote, "I have found 4 names for Patrick in a book written by Hutton, Bishop of Macu. The saint was called Magnonus, that is famous, Succatus, that is the god of war, Patricus, that is father of citizens, Coriticatus, because he served 4 houses of druid." End quote. As can be seen, Tyrconnell said that Patrick had 4 names, all in Latin, some of which are obviously nicknames. How this got twisted into Maewyn Succat is bizarre. In the 1970s, an American librarian called Edna Bart published a book called Shamrocks, Harps, Shillelaghs. In this book she wrote, quote, "Patrick's father was an official who worked for the Roman government. He was known by the Roman name Calpurnius. The family's English name was Succat, meaning clever in war. Patrick's first name was Maewyn. In his writing, he spoke of himself as Patricus, meaning well-born in Latin. Patrick is the English form of this world." As well as making Patrick's Romano-British family speak English hundreds of years before it existed, Bart randomly anglicizes 2 of the 4 names Tyrconnell had given and says one is his first name and the other his surname. Maewyn Succat is not St. Patrick's name. It is the random joining of the anglicized versions of 2 of 4 possible names, though nicknames is probably more appropriate, of St. Patrick, invented in the 1970s. I feel compelled here to point out that St. Patrick did not speak English, as this language would not exist for centuries. He spoke Latin and perhaps a British language. Nonetheless, Google the real name of St. Patrick and weep. While it is possible to discover the truth on the internet with a little searching, this false urban legend keeps growing. Anytime I see someone saying that Maewyn Succat was St. Patrick's real name, I doubt anything else they say. This is perhaps the best way to end this video. There are numerous myths about pagan and early Christian Ireland. Unfortunately, many of these are problematic. Yet, there is a difference between factual mistakes and inventing history or inventing a belief system. Often the latter can become colonialist and exploitive. I've seen many complaints about the misuse of Irish in fantasy, whether in print or on screen. Buffy the Vampire Slayer is a funny example of this. The same applies to religious beliefs and practices. Reconstructing Gaelic beliefs is something interesting and should be positive. However, if you base your beliefs on a Celtomaniac romantic view of Iron Age Ireland without any knowledge of Gaelic history or the Irish language, and without acknowledging the speculative basis of what has been created, as well as drawing on invented myths of a pagan apocalypse based on a story invented by a Norman propagandist, this is something very negative and harmful. It could even be described as cultural appropriation with a colonialist mentality. While Gaelic pre-Christian beliefs have faded, echoes of them can be found. Look for these real echoes on mountaintops, springs, and royal sites. Learn Irish history and how to treat the many interesting texts properly. And forget about harmful myths of a pagan apocalypse that never happened. Gura Mahagav, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please click like and subscribe to the channel. If you can support the channel through YouTube thanks or buy me a coffee, I will be eternally grateful. Slán.